Let's take a look at the financial side of the operation against Islamists. According to Al Arabiya, 1 second of U.S. airstrikes against militants cost $87. So 15 seconds of airstrikes cost the American taxpayer $1,300. President Obama addressed the fight against terrorism while speaking to the UN Assembly on Wednesday. But eyebrows were raised when ISIS only registered third on Barack Obama's list of concerns. Now, joining me to discuss this more is Sergej Trifkovic, who is a political and foreign affairs analyst. Thank you very much for being with us on RT. Let's go straight to that UN General Assembly. Obama mentioned that America's support for the Syrian opposition is actually a bid to tackle ISIS. I want us to take a listen to that clip first.
Together with our partners, America is training and equipping the Syrian opposition to be a counterweight to the terrorists of ISIL and the brutality of the Assad regime.
So given that, is Obama fighting ISIS the only goal that America has in Syria?
Well, apparently from the fact that he's supporting the so-called moderate Syrian opposition, which, by the way, doesn't exist, he's also targeting Bashar al-Assad. And my hunch is that most of these so-called moderates that he's going to train and equip and arm will put fighting Bashar al-Assad much higher on their list of priorities than fighting ISIS, which is, of course, the exact strategy that ISIS would like Obama to adopt, because Bashar al-Assad has the only effective armed force in place capable of fighting ISIS. As we know, the Iraqi army disintegrated when they came to Mosul, even though their force was maybe 1/10 of the Iraqi garrison, and the Syrian opposition, which is non-ISIS, has been totally ineffective in fighting either ISIS or Bashar al-Assad. So it's kind of mysterious why all of a sudden they should become effective in fighting both simultaneously.
And speaking of that, in that speech, he also went on to say things like we're going to monitor who's wanting to go to some of these in Syria or Iraq to fight for these extremists. How are they actually going to monitor that? There's people coming in and out of the borders in both America as well as the UK and France as well. They have the highest numbers there. How are they going to do that if they're not doing that right now? Well,
very hard to tell, because Turkey is not exactly cooperating. Very few people have asked, where have all these international jihadists come from? They didn't come through Iraq or Syria. They came through Turkey. And the Turkish Prime Minister Erdogan has been playing very ambivalent game. First of all, he's not on board with Obama's strategy. He's not even providing the airfields in eastern Turkey for the airstrikes. And he has not closed the border between Turkey and Syria and Iraq, respectively, which is some 400 miles, 750 kilometers long.
Speaking of Turkey, if then the alliance that Mr. Obama is trying to put together is going to defeat this new extremist force, shouldn't they be talking to one of their closest? I mean, Turkey is quite vocal about if there's other issues around their area, they're quite vocal of saying, let's go, let's do it. But now they seem to be, like you said, they seem to be ambivalent. So what is the catch here?
Well, the catch is that Turkey has been one of the providers, one of the aiders and abettors of ISIS in its early days. In fact, it was a joint operation between Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Turkey. Ever since 2.5 years, 3 years ago, Erdogan decided that he would switch to anti-Assad camp. He has been, in fact, quite supportive of the extreme jihadist wing of the Syrian opposition. The one that eventually became ISIS was, in fact, in his good books until as recently as last spring.
The U.S. president drew up a list of world threats. He mentioned I want us to take a listen of that clip, actually. Let's do that.
As we gather here, an outbreak of Ebola overwhelms public health systems in West Africa and threatens to move rapidly across borders. Russian aggression in Europe recalls the days when large nations trampled small ones in pursuit of territorial ambition. The brutality of terrorists in Syria and Iraq forces us to look into the heart of darkness.
So as we heard there, Russian aggression trampling on small countries. Now, I thought this was to tackle terrorism, specifically IS. And now Russia's at the top of this. How so?
Because the Cold War has never stopped. The United States has always regarded Russia as a geopolitical enemy number one. And if you look at the 2 rounds of NATO enlargement, obviously with the end of the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact, NATO didn't make any sense unless it was directed against Russia, unless it was supposed to create a cordon sanitaire, a string of hostile nations around it. And with the enlargement in '96, NATO came to the Tsarist borders. With the enlargement in 2003, with the Baltic republics, it almost came to the suburbs of St. Petersburg. But Ukraine has always remained the glittering prize. And that's what Brzezinski said himself. Take away Ukraine and you really push Russia into the depths of Eurasian landmass. And this animosity to Russia as such is unfortunately present in the Western elite class, the academia, the politicians, the media all along. Just look at the coverage of Sochi. It was so full of bile, so full of unadulterated hate that no ethnic group, no racial group anywhere else in the world could be treated in that way.
It's almost like there's always got to be the bad person and then the good person. If you watch American movies, there's always America's the one who brings good, and then there's always the other person.
And Russia is, for this elite class, always the ultimate other. They think they can even deal with Islamists or else fight them, but as far as the kind of existential view of the world is concerned, Russia does come before ISIS.
On Wednesday, the UN Security Council also unanimously adopted a resolution restricting the movement of foreign fighters, like I said before, to join the ISIS, which was my question earlier on, saying how are they going to monitor that? Now, the nations also agreed to work together to counter extremism, but the US isn't working with the Syrian government, like you mentioned earlier on, against this enemy. Was it all just meaningless rhetoric then? The world watched, we all stood there listening to how we're going to defeat the latest movement of extremism that's affecting us right now.
Well, first of all, the United States is violating 3 sets of laws with its airstrikes in Syria. It has not sought the permission of the Syrian government, it has not sought the permission of the UN Security Council, and it has not asked the US Congress to approve. In fact, Obama claims that he has permanent authority from the previous authorization to fight al-Qaeda, even though ISIS is the enemy of al-Qaeda. It's all very complicated. Effectively, the UN Security Council, the UN General Assembly, these are all talking shops which produce documents which are not worth the paper they're written on. We had Resolution 1244 of the Security Council ending the war in Kosovo. The United States violated it every step of the way, including the recognition of Kosovo's unilateral declaration of independence in 2008. The United States treats the letter of the law as subordinate to the spirit of the exceptional nation.
So why have the UN anyway?
Well, the UN is lingering on as a kind of relic of the early Cold War past. It is like one of those very sick patients whom nobody has the heart to euthanize.
We're going to have to leave it right there. Thank you very much, Srdjan Trifkovic, who is an analyst as well, joining us here in the studio on RT International.